Hey everyone, you are listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. We are two neurodivergent mental health professionals in a neurotypical world. I'm Patrick Casale.
And I'm Dr. Neff.
And during these episodes, we do talk about sensitive subjects, mental health, and there are some conversations that can certainly feel a bit overwhelming. So we do just want to use that disclosure and disclaimer before jumping in. And thanks for listening. Hey everyone, welcome back to your Divergent Conversations. We are almost in 2025. It's actually December 30th today when we're recording this, and we are kind of recapping our year and touching base on the episode that we did last year about intention setting and what we wanted for 2024. So I noticed you grabbed your stuffy as soon as we started talking about this. So what's already coming up for you?
Oh my gosh. That does sound like grabbing my stuff. No, it was more like before we sat down, I was like, oh, I need weight. So I grabbed a blanket and my stuffy and I just saw it on my desk and I was like, oh, I wanted to like squeeze that and give myself some proprioceptive input.
Okay. Love it. Yeah. So I just re-listened to the episode because you suggested that, and I don't know if I want to admit this honestly on the air, but it's the first podcast episode I've ever listened to in my entire life, and it
That's
was good.
wild.
I know it is wild. It's wild. My other podcast has 180 episodes. This has almost 90. It's wild. I get it. One thing that really stood out to me. Well, there's a lot that stood out to me, and I should have written it down. My voice. You had mentioned that via text. Is so much better in like current day than it was a year ago. And for me, that was honestly very eye-opening because there are a lot of times where I get really frustrated with myself still about my voice and the struggles that I have. But it was just like, wow, there has definitely been a significant improvement over the last year.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I noticed when I re-listened to it last night, which was cool to like be able to see that progress. And I think that's part of reflection that's really powerful this time of year, being able to get a snapshot of past selves, because we live with ourselves day to day, right? So it's hard to notice subtle shifts. Like if your voice is getting like a tiny incremental better every day, you're not going to notice that until you like go and actually listen to a podcast, Patrick, from a year ago, and are like, oh yeah, I can see that. And I do. I mean, I shared in last year's episode, like I have mixed relationships to New Year's resolution and that whole process, but I do really value the process of reflection and intention setting.
Me too. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to kind of zoom out. And I think when you're in it all the time, things can feel really overwhelming. They can feel really pressure filled, and like every day is just endless amounts of stress or overwhelm. But there's so many moments to like truly reflect on and like think about not even the progress, but just if we did have any accountability, if we did have any revelations, if there was progress or anything that was made. And there were tough times too.
hmm
And we can talk about that stuff for sure. But one thing I want to say is that you and I have now almost been doing this for 2 years. And I feel like, I don't know, I consider you a very, very close friend. And I'm just grateful to have you in my life. And we've had some hard conversations together this year. And I'm just grateful that we've been able to do that. And I'm also going to meet you in person for the first time ever next Friday.
Wait, is it next Friday? Oh shit, I have so much I have to do before then.
Me too.
Oh my gosh.
Me too.
Yeah, no, we started this 2 year, like, because we started recording in January of 2023. And then I don't think we didn't start releasing it until the spring. But yeah, this is 2 years for us. And likewise, like I consider you one of my very close friends. And yeah, I do think it would be interesting. It makes it sense it didn't happen on air, but we have had some like rupture and repair over the last year. And I actually think that's really healthy to model. That's something that's hard for a lot of neurodivergent folks. I actually just shared this in my newsletter yesterday. I was talking about my tendency for all or nothing thinking, which is part of what makes resolutions hard for me. Because once I break it, it's like, That's ruined for the year. Um, but I have a tendency to be that way in relationships too. Like when I do something that I feel shitty about, I have so much shame that I tend to remove myself from the relationship and like, well, I'll just start again in a new friendship where I won't make any mistakes. And that was my pattern for so much of my life. And I mean, getting married, having kids kind of forces you to work through that because, yes,
Sure.
you can't just have new kids every time you mess up in your parental relationship.
Sure.
So yeah, it has been like relationally, I think it's been a rich year for us in that way.
Absolutely. I think that I often experience a lot of like RSD in friendships when tough conversations are sometimes had. And I definitely immediately go into that mindset of like, I did everything wrong. I'm a bad person. Um, it creates a lot of insecurity. It creates a lot of um, reaction. And I think it's good to have those conversations and to sit with those feelings and to name those things. So um, that's one thing that really stood out to me. Other things that stood out to me. Trying to think of what we talked about specifically, like what we wanted more of and less of, and did we really like stick to that? I know a lot of my conversation was like getting ready to go on this like world tour retreat extravaganza from January till June. And I was talking about romanticism, which we've done an episode on, which was a lot of fun, expectation, and the desire for it all to be done before it even began, and how I would not do that to myself again in 2025. And I can say confidently that I have done that. And I feel really good about having to learn through the experiences of like overeagerness, impulsivity, excitability, romanticism to really finding neutrality or common ground with my system and trying to find balance, because that was a big thing that I've been seeking. And it's been a hard thing to obtain. And I don't think I've clearly like obtained it fully, but I think I've done a much better job with intentionality.
Hmm. That's really powerful, Patrick. That and I feel like that takes quite a bit of kind of depth work to work through, especially the romantification. Yeah, I remember like the line that stood out to me that I said a year ago to you was, "It sounds like you've created a life that you want, but you don't want it." And the fact that you can be more present and not always wanting to escape the moment you're in, that's huge.
Yeah, it was huge. And it's, it's a work in progress. I have a Ted Lasso calendar on my desk, and the thing that it says right now is I'm a work in prog mess. Um,
That's amazing. I'm a work in prog mess. That's so good.
and I think that I can embrace that. And, those 6 months were pretty tough of being in different countries, traveling nonstop, different time zones, sleep issues, sensory overwhelm, autistic burnout, you name it. And I really used the summertime to do nothing and just relax and not try to plan anything. And it really worked really well. And I have really tried to stick to my goal. Like I said, I think on this podcast and with my therapist at the time, I'm only going to schedule work stuff in odd numbered months in 2025. And I have successfully done that. And I feel really good about that because I've had to say no to some opportunities. And some of it is black and white thinking, like you were saying. It's an even numbered month. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that in April. If you said March, maybe, but no, I'm not doing that. But I feel really good about that boundary setting.
Well, I feel like with boundary setting, we sometimes need all or nothing, right? Because it's easier, like it helps with the decision paralysis. It's like, that's really tempting, but it's an even month. I have to say no to it. Like, I actually think in that regard, sometimes that all or nothing thinking can be really helpful when it's hard for us to set boundaries with ourselves. And that was a lot of our conversation a year ago was both of us, we talked a lot about workaholism. We talked a lot about
Yep.
wanting to make our yeses more intentional, which meant also making our nos more intentional.
Yep.
And so I think that's a great example of setting kind of a hard boundary with yourself that I'm sure at times is hard to keep because I'm sure there's tempting offers that come on even months. I mean, April, that's like a huge offer for folks like us.
My friend was like, "Hey, I have a summit in Texas in April right after you get back from Ireland. Would you speak?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not going to do that." "Well, what if we pushed it back by 2 weeks? Would you still come?" And I'm like, I may regret it next year, but I can't commit to that. And I'm just going to say no across the board." So I feel more confident in myself in that way, and allowing for the space for other things to come that are more aligned with what I want to be doing. So I feel good about that. How about you? Because I know you talked a lot about workaholism in that
Mhm.
episode. And there was some workaholism, I think, attached to like grief of COVID that happened at a speaking
Mhm.
event, and how that has really impacted and disrupted some things in your life over the last couple of years.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's really interesting to listen to that back. And actually, Luke and I were just talking about this the other night. How this winter feels better than past winters, which is odd because I've had a like intense flare up of fatigue this fall.
Right.
And what I was realizing when I was listing all that I was doing a year ago, I was like, oh, that's why it feels better. So a year ago, my practice was still open. I'd made the decision to close it, but I gave everyone a 6 months transition. So I was
Sure.
still doing 2 full days of one-on-one um, meetings a week. I was releasing a workbook a week. I was working on the burnout workbook. I was writing a blog post a week. I was doing a newsletter a week. I was making all my social media stuff. I was working 90-hour work weeks. And when I've listened to that podcast back, I had a visceral, like I could feel like I saw the video and I saw the way my room was set up a year ago. And with it is the association of stress and anxiety and just and so much, I think, kind of disorientation. Like I feel like I have a lot more clarity now. I'm sure I'll look back on this in a year and be like, oh my gosh, like 2024 slash beginning of 2025, Megan Anna was so XYZ. Which is great. Like it's a sign of growth if we can look back at our past self and see those things. Um, so yeah, I have trimmed down so much. And some of it is interesting because I talked a lot about both health and workaholism. Some of it was forced. So in July, we had a family gathering. And again, I'm pretty careful about exposure as much as I can be. But I suspect I got COVID because I had like a cold for a month, and um, all the signs point to COVID. And I've never experienced the level of fatigue that I experienced this fall. Like if I could work 3 hours a day, that was a good day. And um, to not have access to my mind was so painful. Yeah, like for a long time, I've not had access to physical energy. That's just been part of my baseline. But to not have access to my mind um, was so painful. I ended up kind of getting out of some agreements that I'd agreed on. So there's very much a forced, I literally cannot work. I hired some new people. So on the flip side of that, that also really helped bring to light what's important to me. I actually think that kind of, in a weird way, kind of cut through the workaholism because I couldn't. And in that season, I've been realizing what does matter to me. And as I've just started on a new medication. I think I'm starting to. Often when I get COVID, it's like 4 or 5 months of terribleness. I think I'm starting to slowly kind of heal from that most recent episode. And what feels most important to me is like having energy for time with my kids, with my spouse. Like there has been a big value reorientation that's come through this season of like terrible health flare up.
It's fascinating to me when something terrible, whether it be health related or tragedy, helps you shift perspective and focus, and it almost forces you to, right? Like it's
Hmm.
like really forces you to take that look in the mirror and kind of, and there's grief in that too. I know how much importance work holds for you, um and how important your mind is for you. I totally relate to that because that's honest, this is my biggest fear is like not having access to it just because physically we talk about chronic pain all the time, but I don't really ever feel good. So, and I think there's grief in that, but I think there's also, it sounds like beautiful moments in that too of just reconnection and refocusing and clarification on things as well. And I think that's super important, all things considered. And knowing behind the scenes from this, like you mentioned yesterday, that you just hired another full-time person to help you in your work. And I think you said something like, obviously I'm going to be making less money, but I'm also going to be opening up more energy. And I think that is so freaking huge.
Yeah, it is. And I had to work through anxiety for that, right? Like I'm the primary income like for our family. And given like I think a lot of families that have neurodivergent children, it's too hard to have two working parents. And so like there was a lot of anxiety to work through of actually prioritizing my time over money. But that does feel value aligned. Well, it does create different stressors. It's like, yeah, that feels very value aligned for me. And I'm impressed I was able to make that decision. I think because I do run anxious, I do have somewhat of a scarcity mindset that, again, I don't think I would have made that decision if it wasn't for the intensity of my health flare up. And so, yeah, it is really interesting to listen to it back. And like, I was like, I want to work on health and I want to work on alcohol and workaholism. And I didn't realize that like a health flare up would actually help me with the work stuff. And then in doing that, I actually feel like I have more capacity to also focus on my health, or maybe it's just felt more urgent to like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it definitely takes more like priority.
Mhm.
But I think that's that's what happens a lot of the time, because last year when we recorded this episode, I was mentioning like stepping away from being a therapist. And that was my first year of like major recovery from throat surgery. And it's still not recovered. Like I can hear it now, but it's not nearly as profound to me. And it did create that shift in focus and perspective of like, okay, my energy is even more limited than I typically have in terms of being just a low energy person. I'm going to have to really become significantly more decisive and intentional, which is really hard. It's still really hard because I do get excited about new opportunities. I get excited about new possibilities. And it's almost like a minute by minute countering like thought process where it's like, oh, that's really exciting. Oh no, but that would cause this. Oh, that's really exciting. But that would create like so much energy loss. So it's like a constant reevaluation. And you had mentioned like you've done this multiple times on this podcast, talking about like a values-based system for determining what you say yes and no to, and how much energy is it going to cost, and is it values aligned if I'm going to use this much energy. So I've been really trying to incorporate that as well, just to like, okay, if I'm going to commit to this family gathering, I have to know how much energy that's going to cost, but I know it's really values aligned. So I'm more likely to say yes versus the things that like might be quick gratification, where in reality, it's like, is the juice worth the squeeze here?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad that framework has been helpful. I find it does create a bit of like decision analysis fatigue, but like it is a really helpful framework. Absolutely. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to pivot us too fast if you still have
Oh, good.
thoughts, but I'm curious as you look ahead to 2025, what are your some of intentions as you go into this year?
I've been trying to like really visualize one or two words for myself that I really want to move into 2025 with. Not to just feel repetitive, but one of those two words is definitely going to be intentionality. And I'm going to try really hard to anchor into that in everything that I do. All of the big decisions I have to make, just really approaching them with openness and intentionality. And the other one is decisiveness. I have felt really stuck professionally for like the last 3 years. And I think it's like, it's really time to embrace who I want to be and who I think I am in a lot of like the professional things that I do and the creative things that I do. Um, so I think those are going to be my two.
Those go well together. And yeah, we've had conversations about that kind of stuckness and kind of being in between a couple spaces professionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
what about you?
Yeah. I like the idea of like finding a word to anchor into that feels really grounded. And I think last year, I feel like my word would have been slow, like slowing down.
Yep.
This year I think this year it's interesting. I think if last year was slow, I feel like 2025, I want my word to be expand or expansive. And I mean that in several ways. Like one, I recently made the decision to go back to therapy. I worked with a fantastic therapist for about 4 years, and at the end of it was my autism discovery. And it actually felt really important to end the work when we did, because it felt like the coming to the autism understanding, the diagnosis, probably spent another 9 months like deeply kind of reflecting on what it meant. Like it felt important to kind of end that course of treatment at that point, because it felt like I came in with a lot of questions and I got them answered.
Right.
And so I've not been in therapy, I think, for about a little over 2 years now. And now I'm sitting more with like, okay, I can name all my experiences. I can name, like, I defensively go into monotropic focus mode to escape my life. I like experience struggle like with intimacy, like IRL, because being around other human bodies is hard. But now I want to like more deeply understand, okay, what has that impact been on me psychologically throughout my life? Like, or even the workaholism piece, right? As my energy comes back, it is easy to work a 10, or not easy, but like it's easy to fall back into patterns like working a 10-hour day if I have energy for it. So beyond the like, well, ADHD is a part of why I am this way, I want to go like the next level of, okay, so I'm like, yeah, just like more deeply working through it. So I think expand psychically is a part of it. I think expand in the sense of I do want to prioritize more real life connection. I've talked about how my world feels very digital, and part of that is like going to 𝗿𝗲𝘀𝘀cie, which again, talk about mixed values. Like I'm terrified of getting COVID and of that sending me back into, another 4 or 5 month spiral. And it's like, let's experiment with this. Let's try a real life thing. Let's experience life and travel and community. And we've talked about hosting a retreat together in Bali. So like there's real life experiences I'm looking forward to, and that would be part of expand. And then also just, I would say the tone of my writing, how I'm writing, I think I'm shifting from kind of direct education to more reflective writing. And that's also part of expansion for me. So yeah, I think my word for this year would be expand, but not in the like frantic, like a slow expand, like a
Yeah.
steady expand, not the franticness that I was doing a year ago.
I love that for you. And I love, like you said, not only the travel piece, because you had mentioned that last episode or a year ago of wanting to get out of the house more and to be in public more with people in general, to get back into feeling like, can I be comfortable with this in any capacity? So I love that you're going to try to do that. And it's a risk for sure, but I think it's a values driven, calculated one. I love that you are writing more reflectively. I think like through the course of this podcast, I personally have seen you open up more and more and more and share more and more and more. And I think when we started this 2 years ago, I don't think that would have been the case very often.
Yeah, like I was definitely, I kind of, and I've actually, this has kind of always been my pattern. Like I have to first get my like knowledge base, and I lead with that because that's less vulnerable for me. And then I tend to once I feel secure in the like the knowledge base, I can usually dip into a more reflective space. And that turn has happened for me. Like the first 2 years of like discovery neurodivergent insights was all about just like accumulating knowledge. And now it's in more of a season of like, okay, like what does this mean about my felt experience of the world, of relationships, of like it's just my curiosities have shifted to a different place, but I needed the knowledge base first.
Totally. Makes perfect sense. I like that. Like thinking about this in like seasons of life too. I think that's always helpful for me as a reflective process. And I just want to give us both credit because I feel like last year when we recorded this, I don't know, maybe we were just struggling more. It seemed like when I
Hmm.
listened to the episode, like, and that doesn't mean we're not struggling, but it just feels like there's been growth this year. And
Hmm.
I feel really good about it in general. And there's been some tough stuff that has happened personally here. You know, we've talked about it, like the Asheville, Western North Carolina stuff going on, and it's going to be ongoing. So it's something to navigate constantly. But even like zooming back to 2 months ago when I really didn't even know if I could be here, till now, I feel a lot more anchored in and centered and grounded here, despite the challenges. And I think it's just kind of using some of the stuff that we're talking about right now as well and really helping me in that process too.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That was interesting also to like reflect back of like a year ago, neither of us knew the hardships that would be a part of 2024 for us. And
Mm.
like, that there have been hard things and like Asheville particularly was and is terrible. And the fact we can both point to growth amidst like both having unexpected hard things happen this last year,
Yeah,
um, feels poignant.
absolutely.
Mm.
I know you're not going to like this. I don't think you're gonna like this question. Are there things in 2025 that you're looking forward to or that you're like proud of? You wrote a book this year. You published a book this
Mhm.
year. So that's awesome.
Oh
And
yeah, that came. Did I like time is foggy? Yeah. Did self care for autistic people come out in 2024?
yeah,
Oh my gosh, yeah, that was a
yeah.
big deal.
You were
Yeah,
talking about it last time, or I was mentioning it last time on the episode. I heard myself say, and you're in the process of publishing and you're
yeah.
writing a book. So you did that.
And it's so funny. People would always ask me like, "How's it doing? Is it selling well?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And I like went and looked the other day, and it's sold about 15,000 copies, which for a book in traditional publishing, like that's
That's
like the
amazing.
10,000 mark is kind of like
Yeah.
this is a success. And I was like, "Wow, that feels like." And I've more than that, like I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from the community about it. So that's felt really good. I do feel proud about that, and that is I appreciate that you realize, like, that's hard for me to name. Yeah, and then I wrote with the same publisher. I really liked them. I wrote the Autistic Burnout Workbook, which will come out in April of 2025. So that'll and then I was queuing up other book contracts, but that's when the fatigue flare up of summer fall hit. I made a really hard decision to cancel some book contracts and some speaking contracts, but I do actually feel like I feel a lot lighter not having a contract saying I'm going to write a book this year. Which this will be the first year in a few where I'm not going into it with a contract to write a book. And it is interesting. I also have less FOMO. I'm like, yeah, that because I
Those
think I've
words that
just
come up a lot. Yeah.
yeah, like I feel and again maybe it's the realignment of values through the energy crash, but it's just like, yeah, that's cool. And gosh, that takes a lot of frantic energy that I don't have, and I don't want the pressure of that. And I'm content. I don't feel like I need to keep like leveling up in my I don't know, um, building and releasing of things.
I love that for you because I think one of your exact quotes was like having FOMO and getting all these offers from from bigger name personalities or bigger name places to do these collaborations or these projects, and the FOMO of saying no.
Hmm.
And I hear you say that you feel content and that you feel lighter. I mean, that's amazing to me to just hear that and to get to experience that.
Hmm. It's amazing to feel it, to be able to feel it. Yeah.
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 For sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
I feel, okay. I feel weird saying this. Um, I feel like I'm like going to get in trouble. So one conflict I've kind of had, but I also think has been helpful. You know how special interests kind of will run a course for a while? Like, I mean, I think autism, ADHD, and neurodiversity will always be a special interest in the sense that, like, if I went to a coffee shop and I was overhearing people talk about it, like, all of my, like, everything would perk up and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I need to jump into this conversation. But I also feel like I'm maybe special interest burned out a little bit. And so I think that's actually helping with having less FOMO is like the first, I would say 2 years was a intense combination of like passion, social justice sensitivity, special interest, energy. And that's why I was able to work as much as I was. And the special interest of it has mellowed out quite a bit. And I'm actually in a point where I'm like, I like am longing for a new special interest to enter my life.
totally.
I've been sending the vibes out to the universe for the last year, like, please bring me another special interest.
Yeah.
But that's part of it for me is that I made a career out of my special interest, and I'm glad I did, but also I kind of burned out
Yeah.
in that sense from my special interest.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about this on here before. Just your special interest and your lived experience turning into your career, becoming all encompassing, right? And like then all of a sudden you're known for this thing. Then all of a sudden you're getting this like all this all these eyes on you being perceived. I know your favorite thing in the world. And then like doesn't mean that you're any less passionate about the topics, right? But it does mean that it probably took an enormous amount of your energy over the last couple of years too.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that would be an interesting conversation of like what happens like when the special energy like stardust dies down. Especially when because a lot of us make careers out of our special interests.
Yep.
Um, yeah, that'd be an interesting conversation to have with multiple people.
Sounds like a good series. So, I mean, I feel like I'm constantly living in that world where I'm like, the stardust is gone. How do I get it back? Yeah, I can relate, but glad to hear this for you for sure. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
honestly, just as your friend, like, I'm just glad to hear that you feel content and you feel ready to move into a chapter where you get to pace and you get to really be intentional and move into that process.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Who knew that giving compliments on this podcast would lead to awkward silences?
It's so entertaining, Patrick
That's
complimenting
who
Megan.
we are. So yeah, I think that trying to think of other questions I have about this last year. Do you have a favorite series that pops out to you that we did?
Ooh, two. Um, I mean, oh gosh, I really so the first two that popped in my head were OCD and giftedness. I think because I learned so much through both those series. But then I
Sure.
also really liked the autism and ADHD series that you and I did.
Yep.
Um, but OCD and giftedness will stand out because I learned a lot from those series, and I like selfishly, I love the series because it's like we get to have conversations with people, and I get to learn new things. So it feeds my intellectual overexcitability critter.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Sure.
I really liked those. How about you? What were some of your favorite series?
I actually think it was the giftedness series.
Hmm.
I really did like the ADHD and autism series that we did just because I liked the way that we worked through the DSM, but also tried really hard to give
Hmm.
a really affirming take on things and kind of challenge some of that too. But I really liked the giftedness series. I learned a lot about myself. I validated some inner child wounding parts of myself. I realized that there are a lot of reasons that I still struggle with certain aspects of my life. So it felt like free therapy.
I loved that for you, by the way. Like I could see the like aha moments, like kind of twinkle, and like I loved that for you, and I loved like kind of watching that.
Thanks.
Mhm.
I probably like this series more than you did, but I enjoyed the entrepreneurial series. Like I enjoyed talking about like the creative aspects of like what types of things people are doing in the world and their own
Mhm.
takes on things and their own ways that they've applied their personalities and their preferences. And so I enjoyed that part too. And we also interviewed a lot of my friends, so I'm sure that didn't hurt. But um, yeah, I've enjoyed a lot of the stuff we've done this year. I'm looking forward to some of our ideas for next year, and I'm also looking forward to giving ourselves more permission to, if you go through another long bout of chronic fatigue, just saying, let's just re-release episodes instead of feeling like we
Mhm.
have to constantly record, like just really allowing ourselves to have some breaks and some balance and some boundaries around expectations.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. I was a guest on Neurodivergent Women podcast, and I first of all I loved the conversation I had with Michelle and Monique. But after we're done recording, one thing they talked about is how they intentionally record seasons, and they talked about how the podcast industry is very male dominant, and part of that is like go go go, like every week release, and that
Right.
they intentionally released it like kind of cyclically of and they said it so much better than I'm saying it, but like kind of feminine energy is cyclical often. And so there was a very thoughtful intentionalness to which they plan out their seasons.
Right.
And I really gravitated toward that. And that was something, I know it's something we've talked about off air, but like we we both have been like flying by the seat of our pants energy with this podcast, in the sense of like, okay, let's hop on, let's figure out what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And both of us want to be more intentional with this podcast, especially as it's grown, and like the responsibility we feel to
Yeah.
make it a more cohesive experience for folks. Um, so that is something that I do look forward to, is kind of, yeah, having more intention in our podcast.
Yeah. I agree 100%. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think I would have had like, and did have some resistance to that idea last year, that you brought up to me. And maybe it is the male dominated energy of like, go, go, go.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think I want that anymore. I don't think I can do it anymore. I just don't have the energy or the capacity to add things anymore in like a less than intentional way. So I think the way that we are like curating series and thinking about guests and really trying hard to figure out how to make a more cohesive experience, because for the last 2 years we've just hopped on Zoom and we've just talked, which I think people do actually appreciate a lot of the time. But like we're almost 90 episodes in. So like eventually we've got to have significantly more thoughtfulness and intentionality in order to create any sort of longevity in this situation. So
Mhm.
yeah.
And that is interesting, like how to keep the intentionality and the authenticity. Because I think part of um, what people have liked about the podcast is the authenticity of like, yeah, we hop on and we have a conversation and we're vulnerable.
Yep.
Um, and so how do you balance the bringing in intentionality and thoughtfulness while also keeping the authenticity?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Spot on. So we'll see. We'll see what we're talking about in a year from now. if, if anything,
Yeah,
who knows?
right. I mean, gosh, so morbid. My first thought is like if we're both alive a year from now, but that's just like always my thought of
Sure.
like
Me too.
I don't assume continual existence. So I hope we're both here a year from now
Sure.
and
Yeah.
talking about something.
Set that intention right now. We're going to set the intention that when we
We both
meet
exist.
next week, we are not going to like or fall into that pattern of we've already talked about of disliking or hating one another and being like, I just don't think we want to do this anymore. And we're going to also set the intention that we're going to exist a year. Super fun way to close this up with. Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, you're always welcome for the like.
I'm too. So same boat.
Yes, I'm always here for the like reminders of our mortality.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. One thing I didn't mention, and I don't want to prolong this episode at all, but one thing that I am looking forward to, and I'm also unbelievably nervous about, is I'm doing a TEDx talk next month.
Yeah, that's huge.
6 months ago, and here we are.
Oh my gosh, are you ready?
No.
Wait, are you gonna do the thing where you don't prep?
No, I have to. I mean,
okay. Because I was like, this is a TEDx talk. Like, you have to have it. It's got to be 15 minutes. It's
yeah,
like,
I know. It's gonna really challenge me in so many ways, and also like standing in the red dot the entire time, and not like.
I've seen people walk around. You can walk around, right?
Okay. Maybe I'll push that envelope and not.
Yeah, I definitely have seen people walk around.
Yeah, I've been really anxious about that piece of like standing in one spot for 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, you should walk around.
And scripting. And all the things.
Because that's not how you talk. So how are you even prepping for it?
Writing out my outline. I have a speaker coach for the event who we've met a couple of times, and he kind of gives feedback, and then I go back to my outline and get stressed out by it, and then I shut my computer off, and yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. That sounds really fun.
15 minutes, right? I'll be over like that. So, and I'm definitely going to bring some fidget toys on stage, and I think I'm going to really try to make it as affirming and accommodating an experience as I possibly can. So,
that's really awesome and amazing. You're doing that, and yeah, it's. I'm sure the prep is.
It's not my favorite,
exciting,
but I feel like that process is right up your alley. So,
the talk prep.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know if the speaking engagement that I have mentioned a few times where I got COVID in 2020, it wasn't an official TED event, but it was the way they were structuring keynotes was TED like structures. And I took it very literally because it was like 15 minutes. So I don't even want to tell you how many hours I spent prepping it. I started a year before. I went through so many revisions, and then I was cutting like individual words to get to the 15 minutes. And then I would like go on long walks and listen to the talk on repeat to memorize it. It was so many hours of prep. I do not envy you. When I think back about
maybe I should be more stressed out. Okay, back to the drawing board.
I mean, you have a very different process than me though around speaking. Like that's been, I wouldn't do well with impromptu speaking. It would be a hot mess. And if I don't have complete confidence that this speech is memorized in my body, then I am prone to like go blank when I'm up front. So I just have a very different process than you.
Totally.
But I do recommend, like, that would be my tip for anyone doing a, like, especially TEDx talk, is recording yourself and then listening to it back, partly for memorization, but also just like the listening to it back is when I did a lot of the revisions, and I could do that while I was I'd go for walks and I'd listen, and that was really helpful.
I appreciate that. I'm actually going to do that. So that's great advice. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other thoughts, reflections, 2025, anythings at all right now?
I don't think so. I feel like we've kind of explored a bit. Anything coming up for you?
No, I feel good about it. And wild to think again, 2 years of this. This will be episode 89. So we're almost at 90, almost at 100 episodes. I mean, it's cool. It's been a cool experience, and I'm grateful to get to do it with you. And I'm just fascinated and excited to see who we have on and what kind of topics we cover and what we kind of talk about next year when we meet and reflect back on what this year has brought to us.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. And that is something that struck me was listening to our episode from a year ago. I was like, whoa, I didn't think much had changed in a year, but looking back, I was like, whoa, so much has changed.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to think, yeah, the 2026 version of us, if we're still alive, like I bet a lot will have changed for both of us.
Yeah,
and for
absolutely.
our listeners who like listened a year ago and are listening now, like if they look back on the last year, I bet a lot has changed.
That's a great point. One thing that just came to my mind is in the episode last year, I said I want to be moving more, play soccer more, and figure out what pickleball is. Did play soccer more, did burst my calf muscle like a water balloon, but did find out what pickleball was and play it pretty consistently with my friend Jen, who is an avid listener and starts every single Friday of hers off by turning our episodes on right at 8 a.m. And if she doesn't, or the episode does not air on time, I get a text message of, where is my podcast and what the hell is happening? So just want to shout you out, Jen. And pickleball is actually really fun, Megan. And you did mention that. So glad to have discovered that too.
I was going to ask, I forgot to ask. I was going to ask if you figured out pickleball. I'm
Yeah, it's
glad
super
you
fun.
sorted that out. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
kick my old ladies all the time. Like they kick my ass, and yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And risk of rupturing calf muscles is probably a lot lower.
That's true. That is true. So live and learn. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. And we hope you had a happy, healthy, safe New Year, and do these reflection exercises, because I do think zooming out is super helpful, especially to just give some newfound perspective and appreciation. And to everyone listening to Divergent Conversations, episodes are out on Fridays on all major platforms and YouTube. You can like, download, subscribe, and share. And goodbye.